Well, I can tell you at least from through the scope and the impact point, my theory seems to be incorrect. But let's go downrange and see. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a little bit of a scientific experiment. I had occasion to purchase a couple of new rifles lately, and of course I installed some scopes on them. And that led me down the rabbit hole of where you should sight your scope in related to a long distance, maybe 100, some people like 200. And of course, when you buy quality ammunition, it leaves the trajectory table alongside of the box. My problem is though, I don't really have access even to 100 or 200 yard range all that often. So the foundation for today's experiment is based on the fact, and experienced AR or military people know this, the idea that your 25 meter or 25 yard zero is also your 250 meter or yard zero. That's a true fact. Problem for me was I don't have a 25 meter indoor range to try all of this out on. So I decided, well, I wonder what would happen when we do it at 10. I did a lot of research, went down a lot of rabbit holes, and one of the theories that I came up with was if you take your height over bore measurement, say it's 2 inches, and at 10 yards, your impact point was 1.5 inches below your aiming point, you should be pretty close. Likewise, of course, if your height over bore measurement, for example, was 3 inches, at 10 yards, you should be striking 2.5 inches low. So I used 2 different calibers, 5.56 and 6.5 Creedmoor, and today I'd really like to see if any of that holds any kind of water whatsoever. I'm already set up. You can see behind me all of the equipment. The range has been made safe, and I'm just going to shoot a cold bore shot based on the data I collected at 10 yards and see where we end up at 100. So like we discussed in the introduction of the video, I've already put some holes with the 6.5 Creedmoor and the 5.56 in a very controlled setting on our indoor range. What I did was subtract 1/2 inch from the height over bore distance, which varies from rifle to rifle. And what you have right here is the 5.56 target. And if I measure from the center to the center of the bullseye, you have 2 inches because my height over bore on the 5.56 is 2.5. What I'm hoping is to show the correlation between that offset and being pretty close to smack on at 100 yards if you use that formula. Likewise with the Creedmoor, took me a little bit longer to get that dialed in with the burris, but you can see we have a much greater distance, I would guess right around 2.5 to 2 3/4 inches. So the heights are different, but if we use the offset, I think you're going to find that we're going to be pretty close at 100 yards. Now, the real world applications for this, some people may be wondering, why do I care? Well, there is in fact, according to the laws of physics, a corresponding point based on what happens at a certain distance, what will happen at a greater distance. Shooting up close to sort of get your rifle sighted in eliminates the concept of wind, of shooter error, lack of stability, perhaps some trigger management issues. So this does have some real world applications, and a lot of people like myself really have to make an effort to go shoot at distances even at 100 yards. This is, of course, we've been here before, my friend Brian Morrison's range, but it's still a drive and it's a little bit of a production to get out here. So if you buy a new gun, a new scope, and you have access to an indoor range, you might try this technique. But let's go back and see how it actually works at 100 yards. As you can see, I'm going to get a measurement for people watching at home of height over bore. On this particular rifle, it's right at 2.25 to 2.5 inches. You can use dial calipers and all of that to do that stuff, but we'll see. So I know some of you are thinking rifles should be in the lead sled. That's not without merit, but I do a lot of varmint hunting. You don't have a lead sled? This is pretty similar to what I would do if I was out groundhog hunting. So I think I'm just going to give it a try, give it as much stability as I can. And my aiming point downrange will be the middle right target. also 5.56. This is my Black Rain Ordnance rifle. Do my best to get off a well-aimed shot here. And let's do another one. Weapons on safe. I do apologize for all of the bees that seem to be floating around the camera lens. They're actually little sweat bees, so I'm not in any great peril in case you were worried about me, but it is probably to you a minor annoyance, so I do apologize. For the second part of the demonstration, I have my Savage AR-10 chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. We'll be using Hornady ELD match bullets with this demonstration, 140 grain, just like we did for the range demonstration. If you're not familiar with the scope on top, it's actually an Eliminator 4 from Burris. Extremely technical piece of equipment that has a built-in rangefinder and will give you a firing solution based on the bullet that you type in, all kinds of weather conditions. It's really a slick piece of technical equipment. Kind of pricey, but super, super cool. In fact, I think they're on the Eliminator 5 by now. So the main difference, as far as I can see, is a lot smaller. It looks more like a conventional scope instead of the beast on top of that. So let's give it a try. So, as you can tell, the height over bore measurement on this setup is considerably higher. In fact, it is right around 3¼ inches, which I obviously did the subtraction and tried to dial that in at 10 yards, that height minus a ½ inch. We'll see how it goes. Well, I can tell you, at least from through the scope and the impact point, my theory seems to be incorrect. But let's go downrange and see. So, interesting finding, on the 5.56, they're considerably way too high. On the 6.5 Creedmoor, they're very low. So there is no universal correlation to any of this whatsoever. And unfortunately, it would seem like that we could work the problem backwards, set it up for 100, set it up for 100, and shoot it at 10, which I think we will. But how would you do that if you didn't have some formula to work off of? So not really a great idea if you had ever tried to sort of hypothesize all of this out before. I'm having no success with it whatsoever. So there you go. During the course of this experiment, I had a revelation, which is there's probably a reason why people universally sight their rifles in at 100 yards. The military uses the close, and that is, as we said, an acceptable sort of correlation between the 2 points. But for me, right now, I can tell you there is no correlation between starting out at an extremely close range, 10 yards, and then trying to transfer it onto a 100-yard result. If you don't know the individual characteristics of your rifle, or maybe its caliber, none of that is terribly useful, at least as far as I'm concerned, to start close. Of course, you can start at 100 and figure out what it was, but it has no real value. There's simply too many unknowns straight out of the box, so to speak. Well, I'm a big believer that even failure down the road will lead you to some kind of success. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and don't be afraid to like and subscribe.